Welcome back to Men and the City from Medellin, Colombia. It's a bit overcast today, but there should be some sun. So I wanted to make a quick video for you guys, specifically to my audience. It tends to be a bit more intellectual. So today's video is going to be called The Balance of Action, a warning to intellectual men. Now, some of you have asked me, and I've spoken to a number of you over the last, 2 or 3 months, but many of you seem very fascinated by the socio-sexual hierarchy that I went through, maybe 6 months ago in a video about good men. I'll link to it below. But in that video, I talked about a hierarchy of alphas, betas, deltas, gammas, and omegas. And a lot of you, from what I gather, were rather intrigued by the gamma. The gamma is somewhat of a misfit. He's an intellectual, he's a creator, he's an artist. And I think many of you identify with that because you don't necessarily see yourselves as fitting neatly into the other categories. And remember that it's a fluid continuum. So nobody is a black box, right? Nobody is a Newtonian object. We all have characteristics that hew towards any number of categories. But gamma is the one that I think fascinated a lot of you. Well, gammas are an interesting group, to be sure. But the danger in being a gamma is that you over-intellectualize, and that is what I want to talk about in this video. It's all well and good to read, to develop yourself intellectually, to become an erudite and sophisticated person, and I certainly encourage you to become so. I endeavor to do the same. I read as much as I can. I stay current on what's happening in the world. However, what I've gleaned from some of you is that that's all that you do most of the time, and there is real danger in pursuing your life like that. So how do we balance that out? Well, I think all of you need to remember that masculinity, fundamentally speaking, is about action. And the reason for that is because action demands courage. Without courage, you can't take action. And that, in many ways, separates us from the opposite sex. It's incumbent upon us to approach women, not the other way around. It's incumbent upon us to provide for our families, not the other way around. It is incumbent upon men to create and build and structure our lives such that we are prosperous. All of that demands action. And so one way to think about all of this, which I suppose is a bit more cerebral, but I think is vitally important, is that when you over-intellectualize, you run the risk of excluding the world around you and rendering yourself relatively impotent if you don't engage with the opposite sex, if you don't go out into the world to exercise or to interact socially with other people. You're stunting your growth and you're limiting your power. One of the things that Alan Watts has said, some of you may know who he is. He's basically an Englishman who went east to learn about Hinduism and Buddhism, and then he evangelized much of that in the West. But he said that life, above all else, is a spontaneous process. That's exactly right. And as such, there are certain metaphysical properties that men cannot, fundamentally speaking, understand or anticipate. This is why human models are always limited. It's why forecasting is a fool's errand. But it's also why a lot of gammas, the intellectual types, who tend to be very bright and intelligent and sophisticated, it's why they lose touch with their masculinity and they sort of disappear like Dostoevsky's anonymous narrator from Notes of notes from underground, they disappear into some kind of underground intellectual world, and they lose touch with the rest of humanity. Another quote that I think is extremely important for those of you who identify as intellectuals or creators, artists, etc., is from a man named Johann Fichte, who said, "A man of firm will molds the world to himself." You can't really be a powerful or empowered individual, certainly not an empowered masculine man, if you do not take action in the real material world. And your intellectual component can empower you to manipulate that world in very productive ways. So don't discount the ability of your mind to translate into productive and empowering action in the real world. A good model, good rule of thumb is the AAA system, if you will, that comes from Demarco, who wrote a good book called UNSCRIPTED. I've mentioned it before. But in his book, the 3A model, the AAA system, is act, assess, and adjust. And that should be a basic template that you follow in your life, whether you're approaching females, or you're trying to build a business, or you're trying to self-improve, end bad habits, create new ones, whatever the case may be. And at the core of that system is action. So do not over-intellectualize. Do not drown yourself in oblivion of thoughts rattling around in your brain that ultimately confuse and disempower you. I want to finish with the cave, because I've argued vociferously that many of you need to go into a cave where you can perfect, refine, and self-improve, and that will help add clarity to your mission. But you also need to come out of the cave. You need to come out of the cave, learn, experience, engage with the world, and then go back into the cave. Again, act, assess, and adjust. And in the process of doing so, your life will radically improve, but it must be tethered to action. You have to continue to take action. So for those of you who identify as gammas, as intellectuals, as thoughtful critics, creators, artists, etc., and you don't really fit on the socio-sexual hierarchy, just remember that you still have to interact with that hierarchy. So you have to come out of the cave, interact with the real world, take what you've learned, and go back into the cave. Stay tuned for more, and we'll talk soon.